A go-kart is about as aerodynamic as a pile of bricks. Sure, you can take a brick off here, a brick off there, maybe knock off an edge or something, but in the end you still have a pile of bricks. But that hasn't stopped manufacturers from trying to improve upon it. But have those efforts created a problem for series and racers alike? Let's get into it. Now, fancy must-have parts have been around racing forever. I mean, salesmen be salesmen. But every once in a while, somebody innovates a part that absolutely everybody has to have. The problem becomes if it's expensive or difficult to use or hard to get, it can actually end up driving people out of racing rather than help it grow. The difficulty comes in understanding which innovations are going to be a problem and which ones won't. DAS, or dual axis steering, comes to mind whenever I think of innovations that everybody thought were going to be a problem that simply weren't. A lot of series made it illegal out of the fear that a lot of drivers were going to have to go out and spend $400 on a device just to remain competitive. Luckily, it wasn't the revolutionary trick that everybody seemed to be afraid it was. When it comes to this new bodywork, will it change racing? Will it become something that everybody has to have? Or is it just another DAS system? Is this new Aero Bodywork expensive? And the answer is yes, of course it is. It's the new trick thing to have. From what I'm looking at online, it's somewhere around 30% more than last year's bodywork. It sort of depends on where you're looking, but the increase is definitely there. Are they going to be worth that extra expense? Maybe. Until we actually see them on the racetrack, we don't know for sure, but we'll get into that a little bit later. Next up is complexity. How hard is it for somebody to use, somebody to get, somebody to make work? Now, as a bit of an aero geek, I understand that I barely understand the basics of the basics of the basics. If you think that you understand aerodynamics, go talk to an F1 aerodynamicist and they'll tell you that they don't understand it. But what I can say is that aerodynamics of a body is a holistic system. Anything that happens at the front affects what happens at the back, what happens at the back affects the front, and everything in between affects both. None of these systems are going to be some kind of miracle aerodynamic revolution unless they are built holistically. Trying to get everything to work in unison in a system as dirty as a go-kart is going to be a high burden for, say, a budget racer, but it's also going to be a high burden for large teams where their mechanics are going to have to build these karts. Keep them in spec the entire time that they're being raced. Make sure that you're repairing things. From a series perspective, this is only a problem in that complexity can drive people away. It is true, racing is already the most complex sport in the world. However, it doesn't mean that you need to throw more things at drivers and teams just to add a burden for the sake of saying, well, it's already complicated, let's keep going. There has to be a balance. As a race director, this is the only thing that actually affects my work. It's the only thing I'm concerned about when it comes to putting new stuff on the racetrack. Now, with this new bodywork, there is 3 factors that are getting my attention. 1 is they're larger, 2 is they're heavier, and 3, they have more complex parts, many more parts. Starting with the fairings, these new fairings are much wider than they've ever been in the past. They're taller, they're heavier, they're just bigger, which means it puts them outside of the front track more than ever before. Now, this is kind of hilarious when you consider that the FIA already has a rule that says you can't have your nose cone outside of your front track, and yet somehow these things got homologated, and that's nothing to say about the shape of the number panel on the OTK. Nevertheless, the last generation of bodywork of fairings were already hooking on rear bumpers and pulling one or the other off. These new larger fairings are going to make that phenomenon worse, and you end up with a larger, heavier piece of plastic flying across the racetrack, which is more dangerous for other drivers and my officials, which I am none too pleased about. And even if all the parts stay on the kart, pulling on that nose cone exposes the front tire to the rear tire and, well, things can fly. Now, the front panel, sometimes called the Nassau panel, I've seen somebody else call it a spoiler. It's just the front panel between your knees. That has become the most complex part of the kart. Now, these panels are attached in 3 places, 2 up by the steering column and 1 down between the driver's feet. And that one by their feet is the one that usually breaks. So if it breaks and a driver is able to continue, it tends to flip up in the airstream in front of the driver's face. Now, in the past, when I've been race directing, as long as the driver seems to be in control and isn't having to look around it, I've allowed the driver to continue on the track. But with these new larger panels, much wider than they've been in the past in some cases, I don't think that in good conscience I could allow a driver to continue on track with that much of an obstruction. It's something that's going to force the hand of officials to address that with a meatball flag and pull them off. And that's nothing to say about the small pieces up high. As anybody who's ever had a front panel get hit, they tend to be quite fragile plastic. If there's an incident where somehow the panel gets damaged up top, are we going to have a bunch of shattered plastic pieces all over the racetrack? How likely is that number panel to actually come up and off the go-kart? They sell them separately, so clearly they're removable. Now, I'm less concerned about safety of the pieces so much as drivers running them over, get flat tires, and you got a slow kart on track that I have to deal with. Is one of those designs going to revolutionize karting and become the thing that everybody has to have in order to be competitive? Obviously, from a series perspective, that is majorly problematic. People having to spend thousands of dollars on bodywork just to be able to compete. Now, I'm not going to speculate on whether or not they aren't an improvement or will be an improvement on what last generation was. I don't have the data for that. But for any of these design packages to have a devastating advantage over all of the other ones, it's going to have to have been designed specifically for a chassis, a width, a size, an engine, seat position, floor pan, rear bumper protection. And so far, I haven't seen a single manufacturer of this bodywork come out with a Briggs specific package, a Rock or Rotax specific package. That means that what they're doing is a one size fits all. And that is not how fluid flow optimization works. It's all about optimization, everything working together. But I mean, they look cool, I guess. But maybe I'm wrong. Like I said, being an aero geek, I know that you can't look at a thing and say that's gonna work and that's not. Even a wind tunnel is just a tool. Until you have the thing on the racetrack, in the wild, in competition, up against the other bodywork, you cannot say for sure how that thing is actually going to function. Because racing is a business and sanctioning bodies don't seem interested in doing anything about it now, this aero chicanery is gonna keep happening. Parts are gonna get more complex until series take a hit and have to step in. I, for one, am excited to see if this is the year. Which one do you think is the best? Do you think any of them are actually gonna be the cut above all the other ones, or are they all gonna kind of blend in the way that the last generation did? Do you think that series should step in and do something to stop the complexity from getting out of hand? Maybe you think it already is out of hand. Let me know. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, do all those good things. And as always, I'll see you at the racetrack. And to be honest, I would like to see the numbers of, say, the late 90s, early 2000s bodywork versus the new stuff, just because of the size of it. The new stuff is much larger and much more forward, whereas the old stuff is much smaller. Area matters as much as how much air you're moving and how you're moving it does.